3 kings, 3 generations, 1 dynasty that changed the fate of Calradia. It began with a pirate, a man who hunted the raiders that destroyed his family. It continued with a conqueror, a king who crushed kingdoms and built the greatest army the North had ever seen. And it now rests on the shoulders of a reckless young ruler, a king who has already lost an eye in battle and may soon lose everything else. This is the story of the Knarling Dynasty, a saga of sea battles, empire wars, betrayal, and survival. A story where the Nords rose from near extinction and where the world of Calradia began to tremble beneath their axes. The Council of Ostican. The winds of Calradia had begun to change. The banners of the North already stretched across half the continent. Cities that once belonged to proud kingdoms now carried the mark of the sea wolf. Yet King Vanra Knarling knew something many conquerors forget. Winning wars is not the same as finishing them, and so a council was called, not in Valvik, the island capital of the Nords, but in the western city of Ostican, a place closer to the frontiers, closer to the powers that still resisted the northern tide. Messengers rode across mountains, forests, and coastlines, summoning the clans that had carried Vanra to power. Clan Stormskar, masters of the northern fleet, Clan Wolfskar, hunters of the dark roads, and one more, a name whispered with both admiration and curiosity among the northern warriors. Yasha the Swift, the king's most trusted mistress, a commander whose speed in war had already become legend. Some said she could move an army faster than most kingdoms could raise one. Others believed Vanra trusted her judgment more than many jarls. Whatever the truth, she was invited to the council, and that meant the coming war would require more than brute force. The gathering. Ostican had never seen such a gathering. Stormskar ships filled the harbor, their carved prows rising like sea beasts above the waves. Wolfskar riders waited beyond the city walls. Refusing the comfort of stone barracks, they preferred open ground, where danger could be seen approaching. Inside the fortress hall, torches burned through the night. Maps of Calradia spread across a massive oak table, and slowly, the leaders of the Northern War Machine arrived. Jarl Skorri Stormskar, smelling of salt and timber, his heavy cloak still wet from sea wind. Jarl Hrodik Wolfskar, silent as always, his sharp eyes studying every corner of the room. Then came Yasha the Swift, light armor, travel dust across her boots, her presence calm but confident. She greeted no one with long speeches, only a small nod toward the king, because she knew why they had gathered. The last to enter the chamber was Vanra Knarling himself. The hall grew quiet. Even the restless Wolfskar scouts along the walls stood still. Vanra walked to the map without ceremony, his hand resting upon the table, his gaze moving slowly across the remaining lands not yet claimed by the North. The deserts of the Asurai, the fractured empire, and the lands of their uneasy allies. Vlandia, the arrival of Vlandia. The heavy doors opened once more, and the delegation of Vlandia entered the hall, led by Fernoria of Clan Daymerich, a woman known for wisdom, caution, and political survival. She had seen the rise of the Nords firsthand, and unlike many rulers in Calradia, she understood the danger of pretending it would stop on its own. She greeted Vanra with respect, but behind that respect, there was caution, because alliances in Calradia were often temporary, and conquerors rarely stopped expanding forever. Still, for now, their goals aligned. The war table. Vanra finally spoke, his voice calm, steady, like distant thunder before a storm. Half of Calradia is ours. That is not victory. It is only the beginning. His hand moved across the map, stopping first along the southern coasts. Stormskar territory. Jarl Skori leaned forward slightly. Vanra continued. The sea will break the south. Stormskar fleets would blockade Imperial ports, cut trade routes, prevent reinforcements from moving freely. Without ships, the southern kingdoms would fight alone, and Stormskar ships were faster than any Imperial navy. Skori nodded slowly. This was a war he understood well. The ocean would become another battlefield. Next, Vanra turned to Hrodik Wolfskar, his finger moving along thin roads and mountain passes. Your wolves go first. Before every major campaign, Wolfskar raiders would move through enemy lands, destroy food stores, hunt supply caravans, spread fear among villages loyal to the Empire. Hrodik gave a small grin. This was exactly the kind of war his clan loved, because once an enemy begins to fear the night, they have already begun to lose. Then Vanra turned toward Yasha the Swift, and the tone of the room shifted, because her role was different, more dangerous, more decisive. You move between them. Her task was not raiding, not naval control. She would command the rapid armies, forces capable of striking where the enemy was weakest, where Stormskar fleets opened the coast, or where Wolfskar raids created chaos. Yasha's armies would arrive, capture cities quickly, and secure territory before resistance could recover. Speed would become the weapon that finished what the other clans began. She studied the map carefully, already planning roads, rivers, and timing. Finally, Vanra faced Fernoria of Vlandia. Many eyes in the hall watched carefully, because this part of the plan mattered greatly. The Vlandians had not been conquered. They had chosen alliance instead. Fernoria spoke carefully. Vlandia would continue supplying weapons, crossbows, steel, siege engineers, but she also offered something else: intelligence. Their merchants traveled across Calradia. Their traders heard rumors in every market, information about Imperial movements, about desert politics, about armies gathering in secret. Vanra listened, then nodded, because wars are not won by strength alone. They are won by knowledge, the vision. The council continued deep into the night, plans forming slowly, Stormskar fleets dominating the seas, Wolfskar raids collapsing enemy supply lines, Yasha's armies striking with lightning speed, and Vlandian steel feeding the northern war machine. One by one, the pieces of the conquest began to fit together, until finally, Vanra spoke once more, his gaze resting on the remaining lands of Calradia. Empires believe walls protect them. Kings believe armies protect them. But nothing protects them from time. He paused, looking at the gathered leaders. And the north has time. The torches flickered across the war map, across deserts, empires, and kingdoms not yet conquered. Outside the fortress walls, the night wind carried the distant sound of waves against the harbor. Stormskar ships waiting for war, Wolfskar scouts already watching the roads, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the future of Calradia waiting to be decided. The Council of Ostican ended as the first light of dawn touched the western sea. Plans had been spoken, alliances confirmed, and the fate of Calradia quietly sealed. But plans alone do not conquer kingdoms. Armies do, and so the Nords did what they had always done best. They moved, not as one massive army, but as three storms spreading across the land. 3 war hosts, each 1,200 warriors strong, each carrying the will of King Vanra Knarling, each marching toward a different destiny. The army of Orticia. From the city of Orticia, the first army gathered. 1,200 soldiers assembled beneath banners of steel and gold. This was not a purely northern force. This army marched under the leadership of Vlandia, the uneasy allies of the Nords. Knights polished their armor beneath the rising sun. Crossbowmen inspected their strings. Siege engineers prepared wagons filled with tools meant for breaking walls. Fernoria of Clan de Merrick stood among them, watching the soldiers with calm determination. Vlandia understood the risk they were taking. They were marching not just for alliance, but for survival, because if the Western Empire survived long enough to recover, they would eventually come for Vlandia. Better to strike first, better to ride beside the northern storm. This army's destination was clear: the Western Empire. Cities filled with old imperial pride, legions that still believed themselves the rightful rulers of Calradia. But the empire had grown slow, comfortable, and now a Vlandian spear would pierce its western flank. While the Nords advanced elsewhere, the first storm had begun to move. The army of Onira. Far to the east, in the city of Onira, another army prepared for war. This host was faster, lighter, and far more dangerous. It marched under the command of Yasha the Swift. Beside her stood the warriors of Clan Wolfskar, the hunters of the north. Their soldiers were different from the heavy forces marching with Vlandia. Less armor, faster horses, lighter packs. They were built for speed, because their war would not be fought slowly. Their enemies were the Asurai and the Southern Empire, two powers separated by deserts and borders, but both vulnerable to sudden strikes. Wolfskar scouts had already spread across the region, watching roads, following caravans, mapping supply routes. When Yasha finally gave the order to march, the army did not advance like a typical host. It flowed across the land like water, Wolfskar riders striking ahead, burning supply wagons, destroying desert wells used by enemy armies, spreading confusion wherever they went. Then, just as fear began to grow, Yasha's main force would arrive, fast, precise, unstoppable. Cities near the border would fall before their neighbors even realized war had begun. This was not conquest through brute strength. This was conquest through speed and terror. And Yasha the Swift understood both perfectly. The army of Quayas. But the greatest host gathered in the southern city of Quayas, because this army was led by the king himself, Vanra Knarling. Warriors from many northern clans stood beneath his banner, veterans of the Khazate Wars, survivors of Batanian forests, soldiers who had watched entire kingdoms collapse before their shield walls. Among them stood the iron discipline of the north, and behind them, ships of Clan Stormskar waited along the coast, their fleets ready to control the nearby waters, to deliver supplies, to carry reinforcements wherever the king required them. Vanra stood at the edge of the city walls, looking south across the desert horizon. The Asurai lands stretched far beyond sight, rich trade cities, caravan routes filled with gold, but also proud warriors who had never bowed easily. This campaign would not be simple, but Vanra did not fear difficult wars. In fact, he welcomed them, because every difficult war forged stronger armies and stronger legends. The king raised his hand, and the horns of the Nords echoed across the desert wind. 1,200 warriors began their march, a wall of shields moving slowly across the sand, not fast like the Wolfskar, not armored like the Vlandian knights, but relentless, the kind of army that simply never stops advancing. The three storms. Across Calradia, Three armies now marched. From Ortisha, Vlandia drove west against the Empire. From Onira, Yasha the Swift unleashed the Wolfskar across the eastern deserts. From Quayas, King Vanra himself marched south with the strength of the northern shield wall. 3 separate campaigns, 3 separate storms, but all guided by the same vision, the conquest of Calradia. Messengers rode between the armies, carrying news of victories, raids, and enemy movements. Stormskar fleets guarded the seas, Wolfskar shadows haunted the roads, and every city along the frontier began to feel the pressure of the northern advance. Some rulers prepared their armies, others tried diplomacy, many simply prayed, because history had begun to move faster than anyone expected. And at the center of it all, a king from the northern mountains, a warlord once dismissed as a reckless raider, now commanded the fate of half the world. Vanra Knarling had unleashed the storm, and soon, all of Calradia would feel its fury. If you enjoy the story so far, make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Now let's get back to the story. The 3 armies of the Northern War had marched. From Ortisha, from Onira, and from Quayas, 3 storms spreading across Calradia, and for a time, the world held its breath. Kings gathered their banners, generals studied their maps, cities strengthened their walls, but in the end, none of them were ready for what was coming: the fall of the Southern Empire. The first kingdom to break was the Southern Empire. For centuries, its marble cities had stood proud. Shining under the southern sun, its legions marched in perfect order, its generals confident in the traditions of Imperial war. At their head stood Valeros Pethros, champion of the South, a warrior whose name had once echoed across many battlefields. But traditions are not always enough, and when the armies of the North arrived, the war became something the Empire had not faced before. The first battles were brutal. Imperial legions formed shield lines outside their cities, spears locked together, banners flying high. But the northern armies did not break. Nord shield walls advanced slowly, step by step, under storms of arrows, axes crashing against Imperial shields, steel against steel. The battlefield became chaos, men shouting, horns sounding, banners falling into the dust. For hours the armies fought beneath the burning sun, neither side willing to retreat. But slowly, the Empire began to bleed. The northern warriors were relentless. They did not panic. They did not scatter. They simply advanced. And every step forward cost the Empire another line of soldiers. When the final Imperial formation collapsed, the battlefield had become a river of blood. Valeros Pethros himself fought until the end. But even champions cannot stand forever against a storm. With his fall, the Southern Empire began to crumble. Cities surrendered. Governors fled. Legions dissolved into scattered survivors. The South, once proud and powerful, had fallen. The war for the Asurai East. But the war was far from finished. In the eastern deserts, the Asurai Confederacy proved far more resilient. Under the blazing desert sun, the army of Yasha the Swift advanced with the warriors of Clan Wolfskar. Their campaign was unlike the battles of the Empire. This war was faster, harsher, and far more unpredictable. The Asurai knew the desert well. Their cavalry moved like wind across the sands, ambushing northern scouts, striking supply lines, disappearing into dunes. For weeks, both sides fought brutal skirmishes across the desert roads. Wolfskar raiders hunted caravans. Asurai riders attacked isolated warbands. Villages changed hands again and again. The The desert became a battlefield without clear lines, only survival. But Yasha the Swift had not earned her name by fighting slow wars. She adapted quickly. Wolfscar scouts began mapping hidden wells, caravan paths, and oasis routes. They learned the rhythm of desert travel. Then the northern strategy changed. Instead of chasing Asurai riders, Yasha targeted their cities. Her armies moved faster than anyone believed possible, striking settlements before defenders could gather, storming gates at dawn, capturing strongholds by night. The battles were savage. Asurai warriors fought fiercely for their homeland, sword against axe, spear against shield. Many times the fighting continued through entire nights beneath torchlight. Both sides suffered terrible losses, but the momentum slowly shifted. One city fell, then another, and soon the banners of the north began rising across eastern Asurai. The desert had not been conquered easily, but Yasha the Swift had carved a path through it, and much of the Eastern Confederacy now belonged to the Northern War, the Western Front. Meanwhile, in the lands of the Western Empire, another war raged. From Morticia, the armies of Vlandia had marched with northern support. Knights rode beneath Vlandian banners. Nord infantry marched beside them, forming shield walls along the roads. The Western Empire was older, more cautious than the South. Its generals knew the danger of facing the northern armies directly, so they fought carefully, fortifying cities, withdrawing from open battle, forcing the invaders into long sieges. Even so, the Vlandian advance was powerful, with Nord warriors reinforcing their armies. They managed to cripple the northern territories of the Western Empire. Several cities fell after hard sieges. Imperial garrisons crushed beneath waves of crossbow bolts and shield walls, but the empire did not collapse. Their leaders pulled their remaining forces deeper into the heartlands, preserving their armies, waiting for the moment to strike back. The war in the west had wounded the empire, but it had not killed it. Not yet. The King's Campaign. While these wars raged across Calradia, another army moved with terrifying speed, the army of Vanra Knarling, from Quayas. The king had marched into the lands of Western Asurai, and unlike the long struggle in the east, this campaign was swift, devastating, and decisive, because Vanra did not travel with ordinary soldiers. He marched with the elite warriors of the northern clans, veterans of countless campaigns, warriors who had fought beside him through every conquest. Among them stood the strongest fighters of the north, men hardened by years of battle, their loyalty to the king unshaken. They moved like a hammer striking the desert. City after city fell beneath their assault. Stormskar ships delivered supplies along the coast. Wolfscar scouts provided intelligence from deep within enemy territory. And wherever Vanra's army appeared, resistance collapsed quickly. The western Asurai defenses shattered beneath the assault. Fortresses fell within days. Caravan cities opened their gates rather than face destruction. Within weeks, the western half of the Asurai lands belonged to the Northern Crown. The final march west. But Vanra did not stop, because news soon reached him. The Western Empire still stood, wounded, but alive, and the Vlandian armies fighting their needed support. The king gathered his commanders, studied the maps, and gave a simple order: march west, across deserts and rivers, across conquered lands still smoking from battle. The elite army of the north began its journey, veterans marching beneath the Sea Wolf banner, toward the final great battlefield waiting in the lands of the Empire. Soon, the Western Empire would face not just Vlandian knights, but the King of the Nords himself. And when that moment came, The fate of Calradia would once again hang in the balance, because wherever Vanra Knarling walked into war, history had a habit of changing forever. The Empire's last stand. The Western Empire had already been wounded, their northern territories crippled by Vlandian armies, their supply routes harassed by Wolfskar raiders, but they were not broken, not yet, in the heartlands of the Empire. The remaining generals gathered their legions. Old Imperial banners were raised once more. The eagle of the Empire still flew above their camps. Thousands of soldiers assembled for one final battle. Veteran legionaries, armored cavalry, crossbow companies, men who believed that if the Empire could win one great battle, the Northern Storm could still be stopped, because even conquerors must bleed eventually, and the Empire was ready to make them bleed. The gathering of armies. Outside a wide valley near the Imperial heartlands, the two greatest armies of the age prepared to clash. From the west came the Vlandian host, knights in heavy armor, their horses stamping the earth, crossbowmen forming lines behind them, Nord infantry standing beside them. Shields raised beneath the Sea Wolf banner. From the east came the army of Vanra Knarling, his elite warriors marching in disciplined formation, axes resting against broad shields, their armor scarred by 100 battles. When the king's banner appeared on the horizon, a silence spread across the battlefield, because now the Empire faced the full power of the Northern War. Two armies, united against the last legions of the Empire. The battle begins. The horns sounded first, deep, echoing across the valley. Imperial drums answered, and soon the air filled with the roar of thousands of soldiers. Arrows darkened the sky. Crossbow bolts slammed into shields. The first lines of infantry collided with a thunder of steel. Imperial legions fought with discipline, their shields locked, their spears striking in unison. They pushed back against the first northern assault. For a moment, it seemed the Empire might actually hold. But then the battlefield began to change. Vanra raised his axe, and the Nord shield wall advanced. Step by step, like a mountain slowly moving forward, axes crashed against Imperial shields. Helmets shattered. Spears snapped beneath the weight of the assault. The Empire fought fiercely, but the Northern warriors had fought too many wars to break easily. The charge of Vlandia. Then came the moment that shattered the Imperial line. Across the western flank, the Vlandian knights charged, hundreds of armored riders surging forward like an iron storm, their lances lowered, their horses pounding across the valley. They struck the Imperial flank with unstoppable force. Shields splintered, formations collapsed. The disciplined lines of the Empire began to crumble. And once the line breaks, the battle is already lost. The king in battle. At the center of the storm fought Vanra Knarling himself, not behind the lines, not watching from safety, but standing within the shield wall beside his warriors, his axe rising, falling, again and again, where the fighting was thickest, where the resistance was strongest. That was where the king stood. His presence alone drove the northern warriors forward, because they knew their king bled beside them, and warriors fight harder when their king fights with them. One by one, the last Imperial banners fell into the dust. Legionaries dropped their weapons. Cavalry scattered across the valley. The Western Empire, last of the Imperial powers, had finally broken. The end of the Empire. By sunset, the battlefield had fallen silent. Broken shields, shattered spears, and fallen banners covered the valley. The surviving Imperial commanders surrendered their swords, their armies destroyed, their empire gone. After centuries of rule, the The Western Empire had taken its final breath, and with it, the last great resistance against the northern conquest had ended. The return to Valvik. Weeks later, across land and sea, the victorious armies returned north. Stormskar fleets carried warriors across the cold waters. Wolfskar scouts rode ahead announcing victory. Vlandian allies returned to their lands rich with spoils and honor. And at the heart of it all, Knarling returned to Valvik, the island city captured long ago by his grandfather, the birthplace of the Northern Empire, the Feast of Victory. That night, the great halls of Valvik burned with torchlight. Long tables filled the chamber, overflowing with roasted meat, bread, and barrels of ale. Jarls, warriors, captains, and allies gathered together. Stormskar sailors laughed loudly. Wolfskar raiders shared stories of the wars. Vlandian knights raised cups beside Nord warriors. And at the center of the hall sat Knarling, the king who had united the clans, the conqueror who had shattered kingdoms, the warlord who had turned half of Calradia into a northern realm. He raised his drinking horn, and the hall fell silent, not out of fear, but out of respect, because every warrior there knew they had witnessed something rare, the birth of a legend. The horn was lifted, the warriors roared with victory, and the halls of Valvik echoed with celebration long into the night. The wars of conquest were over. Calradia had been changed forever, and beneath the banners of the Sea Wolf, the Nords feasted upon their final victory. And this is the end of the saga. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching and stay safe.